Some tips regarding depth of field and taking good photos. Number one, just general, you want to find the best angle for striking photos. You want to decide where, first of all, you want to focus for the easy shooting and best results in capturing the subject. And then, shift your framing a bit to create what we call that ideal composition with perfect spatial balance. You want to focus on the subject's point of view. When you're taking a photo, lower your camera at the subject's point of view, whether it be your pet, a child, whoever it is. Lower yourself down to their level. You'll capture more emotion. Another key thing to remember is to steady your hand. Either use a tripod or put your camera on a chair, a table, anchor your elbow on a chair or table, something to steady that shot. With macro, when you are zoomed in, you are really looking at the intricate structure and the delicate textures, and that's what grabs our attention. It really is a key thing to draw your audience in. Here's another tip that some of you might want to try as you're playing with depth of field. There's a way that you can really play with your subjects. So if you have a scene, let's just say you have a car, a little Matchbox car that you're going to take a photo of, you can actually put a scene in the background. How do you do that? Well, get out a book. Get out a book that has a picture. Art history books have fabulous photos of some of the very well-known architecture around the world. Print out something from the web. Google the Eiffel Tower, and then put it in the background. And if you play with depth of field, it won't be clearly in focus. It'll be a little bit out of focus, but you'll still be able to identify it. And it shows as though you've got some crazy scene going on there. So you place your model in front of that background scene, and the photo will, if you do it right, look like you actually were there. The magnification ratio is something to think about also. And so this ratio, expresses the relative size of the image compared, to that subject. So the larger the magnification ratio, the larger the subject appears. So you have to think about that and what you're capturing. Another thing to think about is when you're looking through your viewfinder, you're not seeing the whole scene. Some cameras are showing you less than 90% of what the picture will be. So you have to think about that. Focal length. We've talked about focal length and aperture, but I want to stress a couple key things here. So with focal length, remember the longer the focal length, the greater the telescopic effect, the narrower the angle of view. And so if you're shooting like 100 millimeter to 180 millimeter, a macro lens, you're going to have a really narrow angle view. The shorter the camera to the subject distance, the greater the blurring in front of and in the back of the focused area. So that means you're going to get a really shorter depth of field. So if you move that camera really close to your subject, you're going to achieve blurring in the front, you're going to get your subject in focus, and then you get blurring in the back. So making that subject the center of attention requires that you take a little bit of time to determine that focus. Your aperture, remember that's controlling the main controller of depth of field, depending on how wide the aperture diaphragm is opening. So the aperture controls the amount of light that's entering a camera through the lens. If we look at an f2.8, it's open wide, and our focused area becomes very shallow. If we're looking at small f22, that focused area becomes very deep, and there's a greater clarity of the images in front of your subject and behind all of those pieces. When the f number is low, the lens is considered bright or fast. So that bright lens captures or creates those blurred backgrounds. Exposure compensation. If you have not found that in your camera, you're going to want to try to find it. So this determines the overall brightness of photos, and a lot of times people will do some bracketing here. So exposure compensation allows the photographer to either get brighter or darker results, and it's a good idea to play around with that because sometimes our photos just are a little bit too dark and we need to play with that exposure compensation.